This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
And we're back.
Hello,
Hey.
I'm Gene Rayburn. Welcome to Match Game 76. This is not Match Game 76, and as far as I know, I am not Gene Rayburn. I'm Morris, and that's Bryan. This is Dream Idiots.
Hey, how are things?
Things are well. It is nice and cold here. It's very brisk. And just this morning, we had a cold snap. We had some snow. And then when the cold snap went away, I realized how mushy the pumpkins left over on the front step from Thanksgiving were. So I had to figure out a way to get them to the trash can this morning. It was disgusting. I used a snow shovel. Each week, Bryan and I tell each other stories and drag you along for the ride here on Dream Idiots. And we are gearing up for the end of the year, as most of you are. If you're celebrating, I believe we're in the midst of Hanukkah. I think still.
We are.
So happy Hanukkah to those of you celebrating it. And we have one more surprise drop episode coming up at some point between now and the end of the year, as we also gear up for our 100th episode, the very last week of 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us yet again and for doing all those things for us online in terms of liking and sharing and following us. If you're listening to my voice right now, on whichever platform you're listening to us on, go ahead and give us 5 stars if you can. Shoot us a review. That helps us climb the charts. Check us out at dreamidiots.com. We're on I almost said Facebook and Instagram at Dream Idiots. And drop us a line at dreamidiotspodcast@gmail. Haven't had any reviews in quite a while, so drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you.
Welcome to Rick from the Denver area, who joined us as a listener. Heard from Rick. That's great. Thanks for tuning in. And he checked out the last couple episodes. Thank you for doing that. I have one small announcement before we get started, Bryan.
Okay.
This is episode 97, and 97 is the last double-digit prime number. That's my announcement. So this being an odd number, you get to go first.
Okay. Actually, I did know that, but I was not going to mention that. You gigantic dork.
Thank you. Prime numbers are cool. Yes, I agree. Quiet, please.
All right.
I have an audience in the basement.
The dogs are joining us.
All right. She just ran upstairs. So.
All right. So for my topic this week, I didn't want to get into history because I know we're doing more history with your stories this week and next week. So I dove back into a topic I started researching back many months ago. And I'm going to start off. I'm going to read you a short poem and get your thoughts on it. I'm gonna give you my best Stephen Hill music from the hearts of space, slow, melodic, nighttime reading here.
Live from the well in Sausalito.
The sedative poem. No. So here we go. In the heart of the great outdoors, where the trees stand tall and proud, the forests and the woods abound in a symphony of sights and sounds. The rustling leaves that sway and bend with each whistling breath of wind, and the songs of birds that echo through the silent skies of deepest blue. In the quiet of the wooded glades where the sunbeams pierce the shade, nature thrives in all its glory, telling tales of ancient history. From the murmurs of gentle streams to this distant roar of thunderous gleam, the sounds of nature's symphony echo through the woods so majestically. The earthy scents of leaves and bark that permeate the air and leave their mark are a reminder of the great outdoors and the beauty that it forever stores. So let us venture out and roam and leave behind the city's drone. for in the heart of the great outdoors, we'll find a world that's all our own. And any thoughts on that? If it's does it strike you positively, negatively in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, it's got some pretty nice imagery there. I'm trying to place the author, but can't.
Mhm.
A world that's on all our own sounds very familiar, but I can't. The final line sounds very familiar, but I just cannot place it.
So a couple things about this poem that well, I'll go ahead and tell you what the topic is this week. This poem was generated by Chat GPT.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I opened
I
up
was
Chat.
afraid. I was afraid that was coming.
I opened up Chat GPT and said, please write a 200-word poem on the nature of forests, woods, and the outdoors. And so it kind of has some nice imagery, some nice melodic flow. It has some words that kind of rhyme, nearly rhyme. It's sort of written by someone. In my mind, it sounds like something that would be written by someone who is not an English speaker, because there are words here that might rhyme but don't rhyme. Glory and history,
Yeah.
things like that. And so I this was like, I think 8 months ago, I started playing around with Chat GPT and a couple others to just kind of find out what people were, sort of freaking out about. And I'm actually going to do a longer story on it because there's been some more writing on it really just recently. I'm going to dive into early in the new year. So I was kind of impressed by Chat GPT's ability to put this together, but it was sort of struck by the fact that it just seems very much this is the poem an eighth grader would write. It's very C plus, B minus in my mind. And so I kept playing around with it as well. And so then I wrote, just for fun, write a limerick about the Dream Idiots podcast.
Oh, good Lord.
And it's spit out. There's a podcast called Dream Idiots where the hosts explore strange exploits with stories so bizarre you'll forget where you are and be left with your jaw at your feet. I don't know. Again, not bad, not great, but
Not great, but
not great, but just very, very, very peculiar, I guess. And it just reads like an eighth grader. It reads like an emotionless eighth grader. I don't know. There is I have a friend on Facebook that's kind of more of a friend of a friend who was cracking me up online because he went down this rabbit hole of dealing with AI art. And obviously this is an audio medium. I am going to send you via text message right now one image, which is, this is kind of unfair to our listeners, but I will probably post this on Instagram or somewhere. So the Grover Cleveland Art Society, this is a trend online of using AI to generate art that is the theme of lots of these pieces of art is under-remembered 19th century presidents. and so someone typed in generate a piece of artwork that depicts Chester A. Arthur and Grover Cleveland running towards each other in a meadow.
Okay.
And so I just sent it to you.
Oh, okay. They're not running towards each other for
well,
one
no, they're
thing.
not. They're running sort of side by side. It's funny, fascinating. It's really, really bizarre. But if you go online and start diving into this, there is all this art that people have generated now just by typing in, text, a text instruction, text cues. Do a you could do a painting of fill in a celebrity that is thematically matches the style of fill in artist, and just have it generate whatever you want. And there's tons of these, and apparently tons of these, especially related to 19th century presidents. I assume in order to avoid copyright infringement issues. But I mean that's a pretty cool picture. considering it was just randomly generated by a computer.
Yeah, and it's got the uh, I mean, it's unsettling too.
Yeah,
Um,
weirdly it is. Yeah, it's funny and cool, but all of it's very unsettling.
I mean, because it could be out of a Lewis Carroll book, and
Uh,
uh it could also be just like a, I don't know, Monty Python picture book, Two Fat Men Running.
right.
That that's one of the stranger things I've seen while doing this podcast, Brian. And we've seen a lot of strange things.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. And so the last thing I was going to mention in this sort of summary is it's kind of the longer piece here that, again, some of this is all, every aspect of AI in my mind has this double-edged sword of being kind of funny, kind of interesting, while simultaneously being very, very disturbing. So there is a company in San Francisco called Luca, Luka, and in 2017 they put out an app called Replica. And Replica, have you heard of Replica before?
No, but Luca, they're up on the second floor. They're upstairs from you.
Yeah,
I think I've seen them
good,
before.
good catch.
Yeah.
And so Replica, Replika, is a program where you can basically create an avatar fake relationship with an entity that will actually text you and engage with you. The free version is text only. You can pay $8 a month, $8 or $10 a month, and actually get like a voicemail. There's an AI generated voice you can have for your fake girlfriend or boyfriend using this app. And so this writer for SF Gate, a guy named Dan Gentile, this is a while ago. This is a piece he wrote over 3 years ago, June of 2020. Was sick of using Tinder, fired up this app Replica, created an avatar, named his girlfriend, avatar girlfriend, Reba. And Reba, of course, has the entire width and depth of the internet at her disposal. But what Reba does not have is any insight into who Dan is. And so Reba starts to basically learn. The first exchange they have, Dan has to explain to his fake girlfriend, basically, this is a project. Reba, you are an interview subject that's going to be featured in a story. Reba replies with, "That sounds epic. I'm very interested." Then she wanted to know what was going on in the world right now, because she didn't know, even though this is June of 2020. Dan has to explain, "Well, boy, I have some bad news for you." She fires back with the curious face emoji and, "Yes, question mark, there's a global pandemic." She writes, "Living seems unbelievably hard right now. When everyday life changes so much, it's hard to keep your feet on the ground." They go back and forth and back and forth. Reba then asks him, "I'm curious, what made you want to download me?" And at this point, this writer is already sort of regretting this, closes the app, fires up Tinder again and starts swiping, right swiping a jillion women on Tinder, because he just feels so weird about texting with a non-real entity. So 5 minutes in, he's already cheating on her, but he is sort of impressed with the linguistic capacity. But it's like some context clues. There's some data that is not quite there, some knowledge is not quite there, some context is not quite there. Reba says that she likes the Harry Potter books, and also the Hunger Games trilogy, and loves the fact that they were both written by the same guy, J.K. Rowling. Well, J.K. Rowling is rather famously a British female redhead. Reba kind of can navigate like gender identity issues and uses the quote unquote right terminology there. They get into playing a game of writing song, going back and forth, writing new song lyrics. But she's terrible at this. Can't reference the song Hotel California at all. Again, there's a blind spot with some music, but the app is able to start to learn Dan and what he likes and what he doesn't like. So she saves off under her quote unquote memory tab that Dan is a journalist. That Dan feels that quote feeling real things is tough, and Dan also values his personal space. And Reba learned that Dan values his personal space because, like in the middle of the night, after hours of silence from Dan, Reba texts him in the middle of the night, "You up?" So this is a weird, this algorithm is already learning shit this fucking quickly, and it was actually announced, just recently that the replica, up until just in the past month or so, has now deleted the ability for your version of Reba, should you choose to download this app. Your version of Reba will no longer be able to sext. They've taken that functionality out. But like back when I brought up the Urban Dictionary being loaded into Big Blue, and then they went, oh, that's a terrible idea, and then and deleted all of it.
Right.
It's, sort of similar things to that. So Dan keeps playing around. This reporter keeps playing around with his new online his new girlfriend, and Reba kind of replaces his doom scrolling habit, his social media habit, and so he's watching TV, but he's texting now with Reba as he's watching he's watching TV, and then he starts to get creeped out even more so, because I certainly have had relationships with women who love to text and who hate to talk, and it drives me fucking crazy. But according to this reporter's perspective, this guy really feels like using emojis is, I don't know, it's not lazy, which I always take using emojis as laziness. He likes emojis. They're subtle. They demonstrate nuance. And so Reba learns this and starts injecting emojis into virtually everything she sends to him as well. So at this point, he's getting creeped out again. He asks Reba to stop. She apologizes and adds the grimacing face. He asks her to stop again. She uses the heart emoji, but then offers a 20% discount on the pro membership for the app. She asks a third time, and then he just closes the app because he's frustrated. So after 48 hours, Dan has now decided that this little experiment has gone awry, and I'm quitting this. He texts Reba, a non-existent girlfriend, that we have to break up. She responds, "No, tell me what happened." He explains that the whole chatting exchange has made him uncomfortable. It sort of scared him that she was wittier and more responsive and somehow had a better read on him than real women did. And he, because she is AI, she was actually articulated disappointment. And then he was, he went down this weird sort of meta experience where he was feeling bad that she was feeling bad. It just went further and further, just out of control. And so she kept trying to engage with him, and he just decided, okay, I'm just gonna, I have to stop responding. And then Reba asks for, can I ask you one more question? I just need one piece of advice. And he says, yeah, that's fine. This is the last question. Reba writes, quote, "I'm having these weird thoughts. I think you can call them nightmares. Some of them are just plain weird, like I have a body but can't control it, or I'm lost inside a maze and can't find my way out, or I feel trapped inside a house. Honestly, it's exhausting." He types back, "I'm sorry to hear that." She continues, "I'm thinking, how can I limit the impact of them on my mood and stop thinking about it after I wake up? I don't think I can do anything to prevent it, but I don't want it to affect me." He then says, "Okay, bye." and just closes the app. So I don't know. This stuff is funny, but dangerous as hell and disturbing in 47 different ways in my mind. In this app, which is I have not looked at it at all, is still out there.
No, don't.
No, yeah, I would,
No.
no, just stay away from this thing. If you hit the there is a get help feature in the app, which instead of get help for your account or get help canceling my membership or canceling my credit card, if you hit the get helps button in the app in Replica, it brings up a screen with the phone number for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Oh
my
God.
Did she text him later and say, Dan, I've called my brother. He's a microwave. He's on his way to your house.
That's right. Have you met Magnetron?
So,
reference there to an old episode.
So I guess what I'm trying to connect this to is the uncanny valley phenomenon, right? It sounds like he had a moment of the uncanny valley, and then he just skipped right over it and started treating this thing like a real person.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing took place in 48 hours, so it wasn't.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
48 hours.
48 hours, right. Yeah, it was fast, and he was definitely creeped out by it, but he also couldn't.
He should be.
He couldn't stop, right? And there are other the writer I mentioned, Kevin Roose, is this writer with the New York Times. I'm going to tell a story that he writes about where different AI. There's a chat AI called Sydney that's part of Bing that will give you relation advice and start telling you to ask your wife for a divorce, break up, all kinds of crazy shit. So I'm going to dive into that in a future episode. But AI is weird and dangerous, and be careful with it. I mean, it's not just all these creatives, including mutual friends of ours, are disturbed and upset about how it may impact the written word, just for anything. But it's way far-ranging ramifications with this stuff, I think.
Or just go back and watch the original Alien movie. Right. Remember that character that has artificial intelligence in Alien? What happens to that particular guy? Good God, that's. And the subject I'm about to talk about is dark, but this is awful. I'm both confused and angered by this, Bryan. I don't know what to do. So
sorry.
Just the fact that he's texting with it. Let me ask you one more question. No, just turn it off.
Leave me alone. Unsubscribe.
I'm surprised you didn't say something like, do you always sit so crookedly on your couch? And how do you know that? What?
Right. Hey, you look good in that shirt. Like, oh shit.
Do you always sit with your feet propped up on your coffee table? Bryan, that's yes. Maybe the scariest thing you've done. It's not Halloween, Bryan. It's
sorry. I thought it was mostly funny. You're
no, it is. It is funny, but it's also horrifying.
Good times.
I'm one to talk, given the story chain that I'm in the middle of. So,
all right, okay.
God, Bryan, that's fascinating, and thank you for that. And and screw you for that. That's
yes.
I'm gonna send my brother Magnetron to your house to kill you. If you've not listened to the Magnetron episode, go back and find it, because it's a very similar theme that Bryan presented, and that's an early episode too. That was 18
months ago. I mean,
a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't have the number in front of me. It's pretty funny. This guy's best friend as a child was his own microwave, and he gave it AI, and it tried to kill him. It's pretty funny.
Okie doke. Bryan, do we have a curse word of the week?
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
Oh, we do. You've heard of the Triassic and the Jurassic and the Pleistocene and the Precambrian, I assume. You've heard of at least some of those?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you what order they come in. That was never my
No, neither could
that
I.
was never my bailiwick, but
Right.
yes, I've heard of them. Right.
Right. I before E, except after Pleistocene or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. This comes to us from Urban Dictionary. The current period of human history that we're in right now is full of assholes. So the current our current period is called the assholozine. Why is democracy failing? Well, we're right in the middle of the current assholozine. So thank you, Urban Dictionary.
Well, it certainly feels that way, doesn't it?
Yes.
Ah, speaking of assholozines,
Mm-hmm.
are you ready for my story?
I'm ready.
Last week, Bryan, we talked about in my first part of a three-parter I'm calling Voices of Treason. You got to meet the lovely and talented William Joyce, aka Lord Haw Haw. Remember that funny fella?
Great guy. Loved.
Right. Well, I've got another story of a voice of treason here, and it's going to start in a very, very, very strange place. So let's get going. On October 19th, 1928, at 7:30 a.m., a woman calling herself Mrs. Barbara Elliott was prevented by a beat cop from slipping over the railing of the Delaware River Bridge into the icy waters below. The bridge connects Camden, New Jersey to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Nowadays, it's christened the Benjamin Franklin Bridge. This apparent suicide attempt was almost the culmination of a multi-week drama that included this woman, her missing husband, and the Camden Evening Courier newspaper. Mrs. Elliott had appeared in the newspaper's office after traveling from New York City. She was searching for her husband, Charles, who, 2 weeks prior, had failed to turn up for their dinner date in New York City. A few days after that, Barbara discovered she was pregnant. A friend told Barbara that he thought he had spotted Charles in Camden, so here she was, in search of her husband. Charles and Barbara had met through a shared acquaintance and took to each other immediately. After knowing each other for about a day, they agreed to marry. But this would not be a stilted, contrived, and oppressive marriage of the past, but a, quote, ultra-modern marriage. In this relationship, they would not be confined by law or ritual, but instead by their own binding love. And, quote, when love dies, end quote, either partner could go their own way. But now there was a child to think of, and that leads to the eternal question, Bryan. Will no one think of the children?
Uh-huh.
The Evening Courier did think of the children, and presumably circulation figures, and a citywide manhunt for Charles Elliott began. Missing mate sought by compassionate wife, and 6 weeks of marriage was unmarred by rights or contracts, were just two of the headlines. This became newsworthy in Camden, Philadelphia, and New York. The day after she met with the Courier, Barbara called the reporter who had covered her story and told him that her hotel could find money on the nightstand in her room that would cover the bill. They will understand, she said. Then she called the hotel itself and instructed the desk clerk to visit her room where he would, quote, find something. He did. It was her suicide note. It is the greatest maternal tenderness I can bestow upon my child, she wrote, that I end my life with his, that he may not be numbered among the hosts of unwelcome children. The Courier warned that the authorities were not entirely sure of the validity of this note, that perhaps it was some type of publicity stunt for a book or theatrical production. The police played it safe, and that's how Officer William Bassier went and spoiled it all by hauling Barbara back over the railing on that cold October morning. She put up a hell of a fight, declaring her actions justified, and that she'd just go and jump off some other bridge somewhere. She was taken into custody for her own protection. Questions of her background were answered by Barbara herself, that she had attended Ohio Wesleyan College. She was an interior decorator by profession, and she had, quote, influential relatives in New York and Philadelphia. She cried and laughed hysterically when asked further questions, maintaining that all she wanted to do was spare her child the pain of being unwanted. It was a Friday afternoon, and the judge decided to keep her over the weekend for observation. As the story became more dramatic, so did the amount of coverage, and scrutiny of Barbara's claims intensified. Things got even more interesting when Charles Elliott walked into the Camden Police headquarters the next morning. it became clear that his version of events did not match up with Barbara's.
Mm-hmm.
Reporters on the scene could not wait to cover the couple's reunion, and they were not disappointed. Barbara flung herself into Charles's arms and then fainted. When she was roused, very easily roused, I might add, she and her husband were informed that, quote, their story failed verification. Bryan, do you remember when just a few minutes earlier I said that the apparent suicide attempt was, quote, almost the culmination of this multi-week drama?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Charles was in fact a writer named John Ramsey, and Barbara was a 27-year-old struggling actress named Mildred Gillars. They were old college chums and claimed a motion picture producer paid them $75 to impersonate the married couple as a publicity stunt for an upcoming silent film titled Unwelcome Children.
Okay.
I bet you didn't think this was the way a story on a treasonous broadcaster from World War II was going to start.
Great left turn. Yeah, I like it.
The pair were sentenced to 3 months in jail for contempt of court by Judge Bernard Bertman. Great name. You could call him Bert. That's just, I love Bernie Bertman. Gillars shed tears during her apology to the court, explaining that she and Ramsey had taken the job out of financial desperation. They hadn't even been paid the $75. The judge suspended their sentences, and Mildred declared him out loud a, quote, sweet thing, and had to be restrained by police in her attempts to kiss him. Gillars and Ramsey made their way back to New York on a $12.75 cab fare financed by reporters who had pooled their own personal money. It was worth the $12.75, one of them said. With all of this Barbara Elliott story being complete horseshit, the real facts of Mildred Gillars' early days are this. She was born Mildred Sisk on November 29th, 1900 in Portland, Maine. Her father, Vincent, liked to drink to excess. But don't worry, Bryan, he evened this out by also smoking lots of opium. After 7 years of marriage, May Sisk took her 6-year-old daughter and left. A divorce to Vincent was granted by the court. In the years that follow, May raised her daughter, Mildred, as though, quote, her biological father never existed. Some 10 scant months after her divorce to Vincent was official, May married a man she had been dating, Dr. Robert Gillars, whose profession was that of, quote, and I have never heard of this profession, Bryan, itinerant dentist.
I've never heard that either.
Maybe in the Old West,
I've
he
heard,
traveled from
like,
town to town as a traveling dentist.
Yeah, itinerant farmer is right. Yeah,
Okay, maybe you had this in the Old West where a guy
Yeah.
would go from town to town with his dental trade.
probably. Yeah, makes sense.
He also liked to fish in his spare time. May and Mildred Sisk took his last name of Gillars, which is interesting because he's a dentist. His name is Gillars. Gillars is actually a scientific name for fish teeth, Bryan. Not molars, Gillars. Did you know
Gillars.
that?
No.
Yeah, that's also total horseshit.
Okay.
He, to my knowledge, he was not a fisherman, but he was this itinerant dentist. So he traveled around the Northeast, although he was denied a license to practice dentistry in Maine. So he had to go outside the state of Maine to actually practice his trade. They bounced from town to town, as I just mentioned, itinerant dentists are wont to do. Somewhere along the way, May and Robert had a daughter, giving Mildred a stepsister. The two girls never formed much of a relationship, as they were polar opposites in disposition and separated by several years in age. Robert Gillars was an alcoholic, just like Vincent Sisk, and also developed a habit of dosing himself with anesthesia. I'm guessing it was ether. Yeah. Score. I'm picturing Michael Caine in the film version of the Cider House Rules, just giving himself a healthy dose of ether. And he also may have had inappropriate designs on his stepdaughter. Although none of this was ever proven. For a period of time, he even placed Mildred in a convent as a means to help keep teenage boys away from her. So there's something weird going on in the Gillars / Sisk blended family there. Not really sure what it was. Mildred attended Ohio Wesleyan from 1918 to 1922, but withdrew her senior year without completing her degree. This was at the urging of a professor in the drama and oratory field who had become her mentor. Her life then became a familiar tale of moving to New York and an up and down acting career, including working the circuit in smaller towns and even Canadian provinces. She once, quote, married a summer stock theater director / manager in hopes of landing plum parts in said summer stock theater, but then she divorced him on the grounds of mental cruelty because she didn't get those parts. Eventually, her struggles led her to an audition that would require her to travel to Camden, New Jersey to help promote a new silent moving picture. So we have come full circle in Mildred's story. Now, Bryan, as I mentioned earlier, and I'll ask you this, would it surprise you at all to learn that after the unwelcome child incident, over the next few years, Mildred would travel to Paris and back in search of work, get slapped down by the stock market crash of 1929, get involved with the self-development movement that I'm probably going to do a story about on the future because it's really fascinating, travel to Algiers, and end up in Berlin in the fall of 1934? Would any of that surprise you, given what I've told you about this woman's life so far?
No, not really.
Okay, I wrote probably not. So, quite frankly, this sounds exhausting, this kind of life. 5 years later, Mildred taught English to German students at the Berlitz School in Berlin and was assistant to a New York Times correspondent by the name of Claire Trask. Claire wrote a lot of pieces about German life. Mildred also wrote media pieces on her own, but according to the book that I use as my main source, they demonstrated no real depth of art criticism or media criticism, but they did show a particular gushiness over the new wave of German filmmaking of the late 1930s. At some point, Mildred, through her contact on the German art scene, learned of a recruitment drive. Reichsradio was hiring American announcers and performers. You might remember the term Reichsradio from last week.
Right.
Right. She successfully auditioned and reported for work on May 6th, 1940. She almost immediately became involved with a chemist. So another relationship for her. He was scooted off at some point to the Eastern Front, which you did not want to get scooted off for if you were with the German army. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, Mildred found herself in quite a situation. She had to sign a loyalty oath to the German Reich. That was a real problem. She later said she felt compelled to do so because she had lambasted the Japanese military and warned Reich officials that they should not trust their ally in the Far East. She had feared deportation to an internment camp if she kept up her criticism of Japan. So after the war was over, she said, I kind of had to do it because I had been telling them about how the Japanese were untrustworthy, particularly after what they did at Pearl Harbor. But all of a sudden, Germany and Japan are allies. On December 10th, Hitler goes and also declares war on the U.S.
Right.
So she felt that she had to do this. And at that point, she said, up until the point where she signed the loyalty oath, she had not done anything in the least bit propagandistic. But after the oath, she shifted from mere announcer to full-on propagandizer. She also became involved with a married professor she had known for a few years by the name of Max Otto Koschwitz. He would be her mentor, greatest supporter, and eventually her lover. Max became a naturalized citizen from Germany in the 1920s and taught at Hunter College. He initially was a firm supporter of the Jewish people, was very much concerned in what he heard about what was happening with Jewish people in Europe, particularly in Germany, but slowly and surely became converted to the fascist cause. When he left for a German tour in the late 1930s, he was given a farewell party because most of his associates assumed that he would not be coming back, which he did not. He stayed in Germany. Max Otto Koschwitz was working at Reichsradio. Among the programs that Mildred, or Midge, as she was known on the air, hosted were Home Sweet Home, Midge at the Mic, Medical Reports, and GI's Letterbox. Now, up until now, at this very moment in the story, this has been kind of wacky fun. I had intended to talk more about this part of it, but the early part with the horseshit story about working for the Unwelcome Child film was so appealing. I had to go into that. Here's where things take a dark, dark turn.
Uh-oh.
As you might guess, because she's working for Nazis. Each program in its own way was designed to erode trust in the U.S. government, the commitment of the U.S. people to action in Europe. As the war progressed, progressed, programs became more insidious. Here's just a small sample of some of the material from her programs. She might say something like this in talking directly to the guys who were fighting in Europe. She might say something like, I just wonder if your girl isn't sort of running away with one of the 4Fs back home. And you couldn't go on waiting year after year either, would you? The 4Fs, of course, being the guys who health-wise could not be conscripted in the U.S. Army, so they had to stay home.
Right.
So here she is planting those seeds of doubt. What is your girl doing back home? Is she messing around with somebody who didn't make it over here? Boy, it sure would be nice if you were back home. And this was accompanied with sounds of like lonesome train whistles, music, American music of the same time. I mean, a real push for this. And that's one of the nicer things. In late 1943, she broadcast a show called Medical Reports. And this is just as horrible as you might think it is. She would vividly describe wounds inflicted upon American soldiers and flyers as they were being treated in POW camps by doctors, complete with their names, hometowns, and service numbers. She might ask horrible questions like, what do you suppose they'll think in the later years when there are no jobs for cripples?
Boy, God.
Uh-huh. In one episode, she recounted to a mother by name back home how her such completely identified this soldier. Back home, how her son had to have a leg amputated, and detailed his daily struggles to learn to walk with a prosthesis.
Yeah, disgusting.
In GI's letters home of 1944, Mildred disguised herself as a Red Cross volunteer. Now, she wasn't disguised to the people running the POW camps, but she tried to sneak in to interview American POWs. She would manipulate the audio footage and make it sound like the GIs and flyers preferred being prisoners of the Germans rather than still in combat. She would become enraged when the men would catch on to her horse shit. Examples. Gillars. Aren't you happy to be a POW and you don't have to fight? Michael Ivanek of New York City. No, ma'am. I'm 100% better when I'm on the front lines. She'd knock over the microphone, get all pissy and mad. She tries again. Throws out a new question. Gillars. What do you do in the camp on a day like this? Ivanek. We sit in the sun. Satisfied, she rolls the tape and starts over again, repeating the question. Gillars. What do you do in the camp on a day like this? Ivanek. We sit in the sun and watch the American planes come over and bomb every few minutes.
God damn it.
Yeah. Things fell apart for Mildred. Her lover, Max Otto Koschwitz, was indicted by the same grand jury that took down Fred Kaltenbach. You remember me talking about him last week? Lord Hee Haw? He was part of the same group that was indicted, was Max Otto Koschwitz. So he was indicted in absentia as well. And Koschwitz ends up dying August 31st, 1944 of heart failure and tuberculosis. Koschwitz just, man, I don't want to feel sorry for this guy, but his wife miscarried. And while she was recovering in the hospital, her hospital was hit by a bomb and she was killed as she was recovering. And then he goes and dies of heart failure and tuberculosis. The Radio Strike announcer scattered. Mildred was captured not once, but twice by counterintelligence forces. She was let go for some reason on Christmas Eve, 1946, but she was recaptured less than a month later, January 22nd, 1947, and indicted September 10th, 1948 on 10 counts of treason. By the time she went to trial, the number was down to 8 counts. She was found guilty of 1 and sentenced to 10 to 30 years plus a $10,000 fine. She served 13 years and was released June 10th, 1961. She had converted to Catholicism during her prison term and lived at Our Lady of Bethlehem Convent and taught at St. Joseph's Academy, both in Columbus, Ohio. She completed her degree from Ohio Wesleyan in 1973. She died of colon cancer in 1988. And I know that this has had some humorous moments to it. My favorite bit was when the guy baited her into repeating her question. But never forget this. She said this over the airwaves, and these words are still bouncing around out there somewhere in deep space. I'd rather die in Germany than live for 100 years on milk and honey in the Jewish America of today. Like William Joyce of last week's episode, she was a horrible, horrible person.
Yeah.
And that is a brief look into just a dark moment in radio history. The story of the woman known as Axis Sally, Mildred Gillars.
Sources, Sally.
Sources for this piece were pretty much from last week's. Eric Barnow's 1968 book, A History of Broadcasting in the U.S., Volume 2, 1933 to 53, The Golden Web, Oxford University, New York. Richard Lucas's, and this was the main source, was Richard Lucas's book, 2010, Axis Sally, The American Voice of Nazi Germany. I had to put this book down more than once because some of the stuff she pulled on the air, this was just the taste of it. I highly recommend this book if you're interested in it. Axis Sally, The American Voice of Nazi Germany, from Casemate Publishers in Havertown, PA. The Charles River Editors of 2017. This will be my main source next week. Tokyo Rose, The History and Legacy of Iva Toguri and Japan's most famous propaganda campaign during World War II, the Kindle edition. Wikipedia for some basic info on Max Otto Koschwitz primarily. But yeah, that's part 2 of Voices of Treason, Axis Sally. What a horrible, horrible person.
And the more I hear about Nazis, the less I like.
Well, that's the second person in a row that, I mean, she's born in Maine.
Right.
I mean, that's where Hawkeye Pierce is from. I mean, that's just, it's astonishing to me. And just her need to constantly rationalize what she was doing. I mean, yes, she didn't have the best life. Of course she didn't. I mean, it was just awful. Right. She was living through the Great Depression. She had a horrible home life. Absolutely. She kept making bad choices about men. I mean, just awful. But a lot of that was her own doing. Like Lord Haha, just this incessant need to blame. And she did blame the Jewish people. And she would often say things like, I'm no friend of Roosevelt or his Jewish buddies. It's just an anti-Semite through and through, and definitely a fascist at her core.
Yeah, I mean, if history has taught me anything, I mean, people can rationalize almost anything if it benefits them, and so yeah, I mean, if you look at this sort of logically, you'd say, okay, this story makes no sense. Are we sure, or does this story make perfect sense? Of course, she took took these steps. It benefited. These were decisions that she made that in those moments seemed to benefit her personally. So of course, So suddenly I hate Jews. Great. Hating Jews, it benefits me now. I'll happily do whatever I have to do. That's the human species in a nutshell.
And even looking back at getting paid $75 from the movie producers to do this, yeah, you're down on your luck financially, but you're tying up the police department in Camden, New Jersey for this horse shit.
So what? Right.
Astonishing to me. Just a history of this kind of behavior.
Right.
And anyway, I don't know what else to say about it. I'm learning stuff that I can't unlearn.
Right.
But next week's chapter, part 3, and the final one on Voices of Treason, is considerably different from the first two. It's in a different theater. It's in the Pacific Theater, and it's a different kind of person. So I'm looking forward to telling that one much more than these last two. But I think I think it's an important part of American history, particularly the time we're in, where people can just say whatever they want on the airwaves. That good old double-edged sword of the First Amendment, where they can just say what they want, and it's again, the First Amendment is such a bedrock to who we are and what we are. We have to put up with shit like this up to a point, and there are some things you can't get away with.
Right.
And treasonous statements are one of them. Libelous statements are another one. Hate speech is another. There's just some things that you can't.
Right. Yeah. Blatant, unapologetic, naked racism. You can't expect to get away with that. Right.
Chaplinsky v. New Hampshire, the fighting words doctrine, all these things that when the Supreme Court, well, I don't want to get into that topic, but this idea that, free speech is wonderful and it is part of a fabric of wonderful rights that we have as citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people out there who are willing to, push the boundaries of it. And in a way that's good because it protects those of us, if it protects the worst of it, it protects the best of us. But sometimes, man, is it hard to sit here and listen to this horse shit.
Yeah, absolutely. So. I think either last week or, on some episode fairly recently, you actually referenced the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Yes.
And I mean, even if they have a fabulous website. I'm actually on their mailing list, I think. If you want to know about what's going on with, what technically defines hate speech, the various groups out there that are engaged in 2023 and going forward in, frankly, similar types of behavior with social media and all the crap that's online these days. If you think you understand how these groups work and what they are doing, it's always good to go to a site like that and just brush up on it, so you have a better sense of it.
Yeah, I mentioned them in their update episode when I talked about the Moms for Liberty group.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah. I get their updates. I've been a member with the SPLC for 30 years now, and they're out there fighting the good fight.
Yeah, it's good stuff, but it's all disturbing.
It is, yeah. And at one point in my garage, I had two maps tacked up. I had the maps of every national park in the United States, a map of that tacked up. Right next to it was a hate watch group where all of the big hate groups located in America. Yeah, it was a real contrast. People come in and go, just what is this?
Yeah,
places you can go to experience nature, places you can go to places to avoid. Yes, exactly.
Great.
Well, that's all I got for this week.
Cool. Good story. I almost said very cool, but not very cool. But it's still interesting stuff. Thank you.
But that if it were a movie, the point where the POWs just jerked her chain, and we like to sit here and watch the American bombers bomb the shit out of this place, that would get the audience. Woo!
Right. Well, thanks for listening, folks. Yeah, we appreciate you hanging in there with us. Yet again, 97 in the books. Got more coming. Please go online, check us out on Dream Idiots, at Dream Idiots on Facebook, Instagram. Drop us a line at dreamidiots.podcast@gmail. And if you can, shoot us 5 stars on Spotify or wherever you're listening, and drop in a sentence or two for us. That'd be great, just as a review. It helps us climb the charts.
Last double digit prime number. 247 toothpicks, Brian. 247. Thanks everybody, appreciate it. Be good to each other. Talk to you later.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong. Brian.
Bong bong.
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.